Hey guys, welcome back to Fundamentals of Design, a TUTS Plus premium course. I'm Kim Bultma, and today we're going to talk about designing for print. Today we're going to discuss what all goes into print design. We'll walk through some concepts like bleed, color requirements, DPI, graphic requirements, and so on. We're going to look at an example, and then we're going to end with a thought-provoking assignment on what you should consider before going to press with a product. All right, so let's start with the definition. Print design is not just the physical work of designing a product with the intent of printing, but it's also all the prep work and all the formatting that goes into it as well. So there's some definite print terminology that you're going to want to familiarize yourself with before getting into designing products for print. They're pretty universal, so when someone says to you, hey, you need to make sure this bleed is a quarter of an inch beyond the trim line, then you're going to know what they're talking about. So first one, page setup. Page setup refers to how a page is formatted in terms of size and margins. Most people are familiar with the traditional 8.5 by 11, which is completely fine and dandy, but many other options are available, like 5 by 7 or 11 by 14. Lots of times the sizes of photography, like photos, also kind of double over as sizes of paper that you can work with, so that's something to consider as well. But before going into a print project, you should find out who the printer will be and find out what is available, like what kind of paper what kind of paper they have, how heavy it is, things like that. Depending on the project, remember that landscape designs are often doable for graphics and text in the same way that the usual portrait mode is. Trim lines are the lines that designate a document's outer edge. Trim lines are one of several terms that deal with how a document is trimmed on the final product. Trim lines are often referenced with bleed. Bleed is the amount of text or graphics that must extend beyond the page or beyond the trim line before you can trim. This is important if you want a graphic to go to the edge of the trim document. When I was a yearbook advisor, our publishing company required that all graphics were either one pica inside the trim line, meaning they would not be trimmed, or at least one pica outside the trim lines, meaning they would bleed off the page after trimming occurred. Bleed amounts often coincide with margins, where bleed amounts refer to the amount of space a graphic must expand beyond the trim lines. The margins are the amount of space objects like text and graphics must be inside the trim lines. In simple word processing, margins are 1 inch. When you're writing that paper for old English class, teacher wanted 1 inch margins all the way around. In graphic design, however, they vary, and usually it's depending on whether they are part of a brochure or a book or a single page design. There are also certain requirements for graphics. Web and print graphics vary greatly, so it's important to be familiar with how print graphics should be formatted. First of all, they need to be in CMYK. That stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, instead of digital RGB, which is red, green, and blue. Print is a 4-color process, which CMYK, where digital often occurs in RGB, or 3 colors. This means that in print, 4 colors make up all of the colors used to print a particular picture. Second, DPI. DPI is dots per inch. Digital graphics, those that are meant for computers or the web, a TV, anything that's not printed, are often saved in 72 DPI. In print, however, they need to be at least 150 and at max 300 DPI. This gives the images the best quality possible for print. Third, you should use JPEG, TIFF, EPS, or PDF image files. These file formats save images with better resolutions and more color options, which make them more ideal for print. Another thing you need to think about too is font. Make sure your fonts are for commercial use. A lot of the fonts that come preloaded with your computer have already been, they've already been paid out. They're usable for commercial purposes. But there are a lot of really good font sites out there like defont.com, and they offer fonts for free, but you often need to read the fine print and test PDF, test your fonts in a PDF format to make sure that the document can print and in a PDF format and not have any restrictions. Okay, let's take a look at an example. This is from the Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha. Okay, so let's think about what do you think went into this document to prepare it for print. First of all, you got up at the top, you've got many different shades of red. You also have a gradient going on in there, and sometimes gradients are really tough to print. They look great on the web, but when it comes to printing them, sometimes they start to pixelate. So you have to be a little careful with that. You need to make sure that your DPI is set at a fairly high resolution to make sure that the gradients will turn out right. Okay, you're going to notice too, look at the graphics on this page. And I'm talking about the things that are on the outsides of the page. You've got that large flower that's kind of off to the right there. Notice how it bleeds off the page. So when they went through and they cut the edges of the page, that image was bled off the page. That means the edge of the image extended beyond the trim lines. And you see that throughout the entire design, that everything bleeds off the page, even the F in gift that bleeds off the top. Other things to consider too is they probably went through and they changed all of their pictures to CMYK so that they printed in the best possible resolution. And even like in terms of their black, they made sure that does your printer have a registration black requirement? You probably don't want to print in 4-color black. It seems to take up a lot of ink, and the black just doesn't come out right in the final product. So those are all things you need to ask whoever's printing the product, what are their requirements for printing. The other thing that's interesting about this too is, upon first glance here, it looks like it's a one-page layout. However, the other thing you have to consider is how are you going to lay something out that's multiple pages? If this is just, it's a trifold, a very large trifold, but each page is 8.5 by 11. So how are you going to lay that out, both front and back? So here you've got the front, which is on the right, you've got the back page, which is in the middle, and then you've got one of the inside flaps, which is the page that's on the left. So you've got to go through and you've got to make sure your margins are all set up correctly, not only the margins that are in the outsides, but also the internal margins for each of the individual pages. And also look and see that all of your outer margins all match up, because you can see along the left there you've got maybe a 1/2 inch margin. Along the bottom you've got about a 1/2 inch margin. Along the far right you also have about a 1/2 inch margin. All right, so let's think about an assignment here. I want you to go out and look for a brochure or a flyer, and I want you to do the same thing we just did. Go through and identify all of the print considerations that had to be made in order for the product to go to print. I mean, what do you think? Did they do a good job of making sure all their pictures were at least 150 DPI, max of 300 DPI? So those are things, what kinds of things did they have to bleed off the page? Did they make an error and something did not fully bleed off the page when you think that they intended it to? All right, so next time we're gonna talk about working with those out there who are non-designers. Again, this is Kim Boltzma, and I want to personally thank you from the Tuts Plus staff for watching.